It begins on a quiet night in 1985. In the calm, tree-lined neighborhoods of Garden Grove, California, an area so peaceful that residents rarely locked their doors. But at 12:27 a.m., that calm is shattered. Police enter a modest suburban home, expecting a disturbance call, maybe a domestic argument. Instead, they step into a scene that will haunt investigators for decades. 23-year-old Linda Brown lies on her bedroom floor, gasping, bleeding, clinging to life after 2 close-range gunshots to her chest. And the only potential suspect, 14-year-old Cinnamon Brown, is nowhere in sight. Officers fan out, flashlights slicing through the darkness, until one beam freezes. On a chilling sight, a dog kennel, a shoe protruding from the shadows. Inside, Cinnamon lies curled like a child hiding from a nightmare, her skin gray, her clothes soaked in vomit, and a ribbon-tied suicide note clenched in her trembling hand. Pills are scattered like confetti around her. Within hours, she confesses. Within months, she's locked away. And for years, the world believes the case is simple: a troubled teen kills her stepmother. But beneath the surface sits a story of manipulation, seduction, insurance money, and a father whose smiling face hides a cold and calculating darkness. The truth won't emerge until Cinnamon, growing older and finally understanding the depth of her father's deception, breaks her silence and exposes a conspiracy so twisted it redefines what a family crime can truly be. On the surface, Ocean Breeze Drive looked like a place where nothing truly bad could happen. A gentle breeze drifted through palm trees lining the sidewalks. Streetlights glowed warm against the midnight sky. The stillness of the neighborhood suggested that every family inside was asleep, safe and untouched by violence. Garden Grove in the 1980s carried that postcard perfect suburban charm: neighbors borrowing sugar, children biking until sunset, organized lawns, and an unspoken belief that safety was part of the community's DNA. But on the night of March 19, 1985, that illusion fractured. Sometime after midnight, David Brown, a soft-spoken computer programmer with a calm demeanor and glasses that made him look more like a math teacher than a suspect in anything sinister, returned home from a late-night drive. He expected silence. Instead, he found chaos. His sister-in-law, Patty, only 17, clutched baby Ashley in her arms, her face pale and her voice shaking uncontrollably. There were gunshots. "Something's wrong. Linda isn't answering," she stammered. David, strangely composed, didn't rush toward the sound. He didn't sprint down the hallway or scream his wife's name. Instead, he paused long enough that responding officers would later question that calm and dialed his parents before dialing 911. In moments of crisis, people reveal who they truly are. Some run toward danger, some freeze, and some pause just long enough to raise suspicion. When officers arrived, the first thing they noticed was the eerie quiet. No crying, no screaming, no thuds or frantic movement, just a young man guiding them through the house with unsettling politeness given the circumstances. They reached the master bedroom. The door creaked open. Flashlights scanned across the bed and froze on Linda Brown, lying on her back, eyes half open, chest rising and falling in shallow, agonized breaths. Blood soaked the sheets beneath her. 2 dark bullet holes marred her chest. The metallic smell of gunfire still lingered in the air. Paramedics rushed in, stepping around drawers pulled open and scattered, clothes that made the room look more staged than naturally chaotic. Linda gasped, her breaths fading like the final flickers of a candle. Across the room, officers immediately began searching for the only missing family member, 14-year-old Cinnamon, Linda's stepdaughter. She wasn't in her room. She wasn't outside. She wasn't responding to calls. As dawn approached, investigators understood something terrible. A young woman was dying, and a young girl had vanished into the night. Yet even with all this unfolding, Linda fighting for her life, chaos erupting around him, David remained oddly detached. He rubbed his temples, complained about a headache, and spoke in a monotone that left first responders unsettled. One officer would later recall he was calm. Too calm. A man's wife is dying, and he kept talking like he was late for work. The seeds of suspicion were planted, but investigators didn't yet understand how deep those suspicions would grow. The search for Cinnamon intensified as night dissolved into gray early morning light. Officers combed the property behind the Brown home, moving slowly through the yard, calling her name. The silence felt heavier with each passing minute, too heavy for officers who feared the worst. A missing teenage girl after a shooting often meant an abduction or another victim. Then one detective's flashlight stopped. A single white tennis shoe stuck out from the entrance of a wooden dog kennel, the kind large enough for a medium-sized dog but too small for a teenage girl to comfortably enter. "Hold on, something's here." As they moved closer, the smell hit them first a sour, acidic wave that made 2 officers recoil. Bright red vomit splattered the dirt floor inside the kennel. Empty pill capsules lay broken, forming a thin layer around a curled-up body. Inside, Cinnamon Brown lay motionless, knees tucked against her chest, hair matted, her breathing shallow. Her skin looked waxy, tinted gray, the unmistakable sign of a massive drug overdose that her small body struggled to fight. In her right hand, she clutched a small pink piece of cardboard tied neatly with a ribbon. A suicide note. The handwriting wavered with desperation. Dear God, forgive me. I hurt her. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. The words didn't sound like those of a hardened killer. They sounded like the panicked scribble of a frightened child who didn't understand the magnitude of her actions. Officers lifted Cinnamon carefully from the kennel, her body limp, her head rolling side to side. Her breath came in weak gasps. Foam bubbled at the corners of her mouth. Stay with us, sweetheart, stay with us, a paramedic urged, even as her pupils rolled unevenly. Kids don't usually hide in dog kennels. Kids don't usually swallow piles of pills after killing someone. Something about the scene didn't feel like a teenage crime. It felt like a tragedy with missing pieces. As they loaded her into the ambulance, one officer noticed her shoes were tied neatly, her clothes were clean except for the vomit, and the pill capsules seemed almost too perfectly scattered around her. It looked staged, but there was no time to investigate that now. Cinnamon hovered between consciousness and delirium, mumbling incoherent fragments as paramedics worked to stabilize her. One chilling whisper slipped out. Daddy said I had to, but it was so faint. No one knew what she meant. Not yet. At Garden Grove Community Hospital, doctors worked quickly to pump Cinnamon's stomach and stabilize her. The overdose cocktail included painkillers, sedatives, and prescription pills she should never have had access to. Nurses noted her hands trembled uncontrollably. Her speech slurred whenever she attempted to talk, and she drifted in and out of consciousness like someone caught between dreams and nightmares. Despite her fragile state, a detective waited outside the room. Protocol required them to gather a statement as soon as she was medically able, but what they didn't expect was how easily, how quickly she would confess. When she finally opened her eyes, glazed and unfocused, the detective stepped forward. Cinnamon, do you know why you're here? Her lips moved slowly before any sound emerged. Because I hurt Linda. The detective leaned in. How did you hurt her? With the innocence of a child admitting to breaking a vase, she whispered, I shot her. No hesitation, no fear, no bargaining, just a flat, emotionless confession from a drugged and disoriented 14-year-old girl. She went on, her words drifting like loose pages in the wind. She said she'd taken her father's revolver, that she fired once in Patty's room, then twice at Linda. That she'd been angry about rules, chores, tension in the house, that the voices in her head were telling her she was a burden. To investigators, it sounded tidy. Too tidy. Almost rehearsed. Doctors later reported that Cinnamon repeated fragments of the same story to nurses, to a psychiatrist, even to the janitor who passed by her bed, but each retelling lacked emotional understanding, more like she was reciting lines than reliving a traumatic moment. Most murder confessions come with tears, with panic, with fear. Cinnamon's came with none of those. She sounded programmed. Yet despite the oddities, the case felt open and shut. A depressed teenager kills her stepmother, attempts suicide, and leaves behind a handwritten note taking full responsibility. What no one knew at the time was that hidden beneath that simple confession were layers of manipulation, grooming, psychological pressure, and a father whose influence over his daughter would later be described as cult-like. But for the moment, the system saw only one thing, a girl who admitted to murder, and with that, the wheels of justice began turning slowly, heavily, and tragically again. A 14-year-old who had no idea that the truth she believed wasn't the truth at all. The courtroom felt colder than usual the morning Cinnamon Brown was brought in. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Spectators whispered behind hands, their curiosity sharpened by the idea of a 14-year-old girl standing trial for murder. The district attorney himself had commented privately, "This is the youngest homicide suspect we've seen in years." That alone made the case a public magnet. Because of her age, the trial was held in juvenile court, but the media storms surrounding it made it feel like a full adult prosecution. Cinnamon walked in wearing a loose blue detention center uniform, her red hair brushed but unstyled, her face pale from months of recovery and emotional exhaustion. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like a child forced to sit in a place designed for people who had made adult choices. Her lawyers argued she had no memory of the shooting. They described her psychological profile, her history of depression, The pressure of living in a tense home environment. A psychiatrist explained dissociation, how trauma can sever memory from consciousness. The defense painted a picture of a confused girl overwhelmed by emotional burdens she didn't understand, but the prosecution countered with precision. They presented the suicide note. They played recordings of her confession. They called Patty to testify. Patty, trembling and hesitant, claimed Cinnamon had been asking questions about the revolver weeks earlier. She wanted to know how it worked, Patty said. She asked where the bullets were kept. Her voice cracked, but her statement hit its target: premeditation. The prosecutor leaned into that word, repeating it until it settled like dust over the courtroom. Premeditation. 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 He argued Cinnamon planned the murder because she resented Linda's rules. He described the shots as deliberate, citing the angle and distance. He said a troubled teen could be just as deadly as an adult. And Cinnamon? She sat silently, staring down at her hands, unable or unwilling to look anyone in the eyes. Juvenile court isn't designed to unravel mind games, manipulation, or complex family dynamics. It's designed to judge actions, and the action, in this case, was fatal. When the judge delivered his ruling, the tension in the room tightened until it felt like a physical weight. "Cinnamon Brown," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you are found guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps filled the chamber. He continued, "Given the circumstances, your age, and the nature of the crime, you are sentenced to 27 years to life." It was a devastating sentence for a child, but the judge also added a note of possibility. With good behavior, she could be released earlier. Cinnamon didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't look at her father. But in that moment, her life divided into two distinct eras: before the verdict, and everything after. The youth correctional facility where Cinnamon was placed was designed to rehabilitate, not punish. Still, the transition from a suburban bedroom to a locked cell block was jarring. Guards called her Brown, not Cinnamon. Meals came on plastic trays. Lights snapped off at 9 p.m. sharp. Privacy became a concept she could no longer claim. Yet, despite everything, her age, her sentence, the enormity of the crime, Cinnamon adapted. She became what staff later described as a model inmate. She took classes. She joined the choir. She worked in the kitchen. She avoided conflict and drama. She followed rules with an obedience that at times seemed excessive, almost as if she believed she needed to be perfect. And hovering over her new life was one figure, her father, David Brown. At first, he visited often. He brought snacks from the commissary, joked gently to keep her spirits up, reminded her he was working on getting her out, and assured her the lawyers were doing everything possible. His presence warmed Cinnamon, who trusted him more than anyone else in the world. But every visit had a refrain, a quiet, persistent instruction: stick to the story. Don't complicate things. If anyone asks, you don't remember anything. These reminders slid into their conversations like shadows, and Cinnamon, raised to believe in her father's wisdom and authority, accepted them without question. But gradually things changed. His visits became shorter, then less frequent, then unpredictable. He began sending excuses through letters. Work was busy, money was tight, his health wasn't good. Cinnamon reread the letters late at night, clutching the pages, trying to understand why the man she protected seemed to be drifting away. The other girls in the facility noticed. "Your dad doesn't come around much, does he?" one remarked. "You did all that for him, and he left you alone?" Cinnamon defended him every time. "He's doing his best. He loves me. He just needs time." But inside, she felt something unraveling, an ache of betrayal growing stronger each month. Love can blind. Loyalty can chain. And sometimes the person we trust most is the one tightening the ropes. One day, a counselor asked her a simple question: "Cinnamon, have you ever thought that someone might have influenced your decisions that night?" Silence. Then Cinnamon whispered, "No, I did it. I was the problem." Even then, she couldn't see the truth. That clarity wouldn't come for years, not until the detectives returned armed with new suspicions, new evidence, and a growing belief that Cinnamon was not the villain, but the victim. Even after the trial ended and Cinnamon began her sentence, the case haunted the original investigators, particularly Detective Don Brisbane and Sergeant Bill Mahoney, seasoned officers with decades of field experience. Something about the Brown household never sat right with them. Detectives are trained to pay attention to patterns, to inconsistencies, to the subtle things that break the rhythm of truth. And David Brown's rhythm was deeply offbeat. The first red flag? His reaction the night of the shooting. Mahoney remembered it vividly. He said he couldn't go into the room because he had a headache. A headache? Your wife is dying? The second red flag? His choice to call his parents before calling 911. It was an odd detour when seconds mattered. The third red flag? He didn't even attend most of Cinnamon's hearings. What father stays home while his daughter faces decades behind bars? Layers of unease built like sediment. But the moment that transformed suspicion into full-fledged concern came months after Cinnamon's conviction, when her grandfather, an elderly man with gentle eyes and a trembling voice, asked to speak privately with Detective Brisbane. "I don't think Cinnamon did this on her own," he said quietly. Patty used to talk about saving David, saving him from Linda. Those words struck like lightning. Saving him? Saving him from what? And why would a teenager feel she needed to remove her sister to save a grown man? Detectives revisited every detail of the case. They analyzed David's financial behavior, his cold demeanor, the insurer whispers, the way Patty hovered around him almost protectively. They remembered how Patty had been the one holding the baby during the chaos, how she'd been strangely calm, how her story had always sounded practiced. And then there were the documented behaviors: Patty following David around the house, Patty cooking his meals, Patty sleeping in the room adjacent to his, Patty watching him like a love-struck show. Mahoney scrawled one sentence in his notebook during that review: "This is not a normal family dynamic." The investigators pressed harder. They interviewed neighbors, co-workers, extended family. What they uncovered was a portrait more disturbing than anything they expected: manipulation, emotional control, unexplained money movements, and a deep psychological hold David seemed to have over both young girls. What happens behind closed doors doesn't stay hidden forever, and in the Brown household the cracks were finally beginning to show. By the time detectives finished their initial reassessment, one conclusion rose above the rest: Cinnamon wasn't the mastermind. She wasn't even the main suspect. She was the pawn. And the real story, one involving greed, seduction, and psychological domination, was still buried beneath layers of lies. The investigation wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. To understand the truth behind Linda Brown's murder, detectives needed to go back years, back to the moment David and Linda first crossed paths, because buried beneath their marriage was a disturbing power imbalance that would later become the spine of the entire case. Linda K. Bailey was barely in her mid-teens when David Brown entered her life. She and her sisters grew up in a fractured home. Poverty, instability, and emotional turbulence were common features. Linda was soft-spoken, eager to please, and deeply insecure. She wasn't searching for love, she was searching for safety. David, in contrast, was a grown man, older, financially stable, and intelligent. He worked with computers, had a calm demeanor, and wore the kind of quiet confidence that younger girls often mistook for maturity. At first, he dated one of Linda's older sisters, but as the months passed, his attention gradually shifted toward Linda herself. It started innocently: little gestures, small gifts, compliments that seemed harmless. He paid for her school clothes. He bought her lunch. He offered rides home. He positioned himself as a caretaker, a mentor, a savior from the chaos of her young life. By the time Linda was 14, his involvement was so deep that distancing herself became almost impossible. Manipulators don't start with control, they start with comfort. They build trust, dependency, and gratitude, and by the time their true intentions surface, their victims already believe they owe them everything. Linda married David as a teenager. She was young enough to still be discovering who she was, yet old enough for the law to recognize the union. David quickly integrated her into his world, not as an equal partner, but as an extension of himself. He set the rules. He set the expectations. He monitored her friendships, her habits, her movement. Linda became the wife, the office assistant, the stepmother to Cinnamon, and eventually the mother of his newborn daughter, Ashley. She didn't just marry him. She inherited a life scripted by him. Behind closed doors, Linda's frustrations grew. She was overwhelmed, emotionally drained from raising 2 children and managing David's business paperwork. She complained to friends about exhaustion. She fought with David about money, chores, and responsibility. At times, she expressed fear that she wasn't doing enough, fear that she was failing him, fear that she would somehow ruin everything. But those closest to her later realized the truth. Linda was not afraid of failing. She was afraid of him, and at the center of it all stood her younger sister, Patty, who idolized David. Patty watched the marriage with a mixture of admiration and jealousy. She was drawn to David's authority, his confidence, his control. She saw in him the power she wished she had, and David saw in her something even more valuable: loyalty. A loyalty deeper, more impressionable, and more malleable than Linda's. In stories like these, love is rarely the motive. Control is. And control thrives best in the shadows between vulnerable hearts. Detectives would soon discover that David's relationship with Linda was not a romance gone wrong. It was a scheme. A structure, a plan built over years, carefully crafted by a man who understood how to manipulate young minds. And Linda's death was not the tragedy of a teen acting out. It was the result of a triangle forged from dependency, obsession, and a man who turned affection into a weapon. Murder investigations often turn on physical evidence: guns, fingerprints, footprints, fibers. But in the Brown case, the breakthrough came from something far less tangible: money. Detectives had already suspected something off about David's behavior, but the financial records blew the entire story into a new dimension of motive and planning. At first, David claimed Linda's life insurance policy was small, nothing significant, just a modest safety measure. A few $1,000s at most, he said. Nothing worth killing for. But when investigators pulled the actual documentation, their jaws tightened. Linda had multiple life insurance policies. Not one. Several, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, a fortune in 1985. And here was the kicker: many had been purchased recently. Some had increased in value shortly before her death, and all listed David Brown as the beneficiary. Money, in murder cases, is rarely a coincidence. With these payouts, David purchased a luxury Anaheim Hills home, a dramatic upgrade from their modest Garden Grove residence. He bought new cars. He splurged on Las Vegas trips. He took Patty with him more often than anyone expected. Detectives couldn't ignore the implications. Linda's death didn't just help David financially. It transformed his lifestyle entirely. When grief leads to luxury, detectives raise eyebrows. When grief leads to profit, detectives launch investigation. But when grief is absent altogether, detectives prepare for murder charges. The financial timeline painted a chilling portrait. Months before the murder, David increased the insurance amounts. Weeks before the murder, he discussed debt concerns with co-workers. Days before the murder, he talked about big changes coming. Hours after the murder, he acted calm, distant, and strangely focused on future arrangements. The money connected all the dots. What looked like a child's impulsive crime was beginning to resemble a meticulously orchestrated plan. A plan where Cinnamon's confession, overdose, and suicide note were not spontaneous events, but components of a larger scheme. And at the center of that scheme was a man whose financial gain aligned perfectly with his wife's death. The detectives reviewed bank statements, credit allocations, and spending logs. The more they studied, the clearer the picture became. David Brown didn't just stand to gain from Linda's death. He needed it. For years, Cinnamon Brown lived behind bars, believing one narrative: that she and she alone was responsible for Linda's death. She believed she had acted out of anger, confusion, emotional instability. She believed she deserved her sentence. She believed her father loved her. But as time moved on, the fractures in that belief grew wider. David's visits continued to decline. His letters became shorter, colder. His promises of working with lawyers faded entirely. The final blow came when Cinnamon learned through whispers, not from him, that her father had moved into a spacious home using insurance money from Linda's death with Patty. Not just living together. Married. Her aunt, her co-defendant. Her father's soulmate replacement. Her own younger relative stepping into Linda's place, as though nothing tragic had happened. The betrayal shook her to the core. How could he do this? How could he move on? How could he marry Patty when Cinnamon was rotting in prison? The emotional storm built slowly until it reached a breaking point. So, when detectives Brisbane and Mahoney re-entered her life, this time with gentleness, with sincerity, with the suspicion that she was not the villain but the victim, Cinnamon's defenses finally cracked. She began to talk, and what she revealed changed the case forever. She said her father discussed killing Linda for months. He told her Linda was ruining his life. He told her the family would fall apart. He told her she needed to help him. He told her she was young enough that the courts would go easy. He told her he would take care of her. Cinnamon described the night he woke her. He gave her the gun. He told her exactly what to do. He told her to swallow pills afterward. He told her Patty would handle the rest. He told her everything would be fine, and she believed him. Because he was her father. Because she trusted him. Because she had been conditioned to obey. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals don't hold the weapon. They hold the mind of the person who does. When Cinnamon finished her confession, she broke down, not from guilt, but from realization. A realization years in the making. She didn't destroy her life. He did. The detectives left that interview shaken, not because Cinnamon's story was unbelievable, but because it made perfect sense. The financial motive, the manipulative behavior, the grooming of both girls, the staged overdose, the calm demeanor, the immediate profit, the quick move into a new life with Patty, everything aligned. Cinnamon, for the first time, wasn't the guilty one. She was the proof. The proof that David Brown had engineered the entire crime. And now, the case was no longer focused on a child's confession. It was focused on taking down the mastermind. When Cinnamon finally revealed the truth, Detectives Brisbane and Mahoney knew they were standing at the edge of a conspiracy deeper than anything they had originally imagined. Linda Brown had not been the victim of a troubled teenager. She had been sacrificed in a plan crafted by the one man who should have protected his family, not manipulated them. David Brown, a quiet, intelligent man, a self-styled computer genius, a loving father with an unnervingly calm disposition, and, as the case now suggested, a manipulator with the emotional instincts of a predator. Detectives confronted the district attorney with everything they had gathered: Cinnamon's new statement, the financial motive, suspicious behavior, changes in lifestyle, and the inappropriate relationship David appeared to cultivate with Patty. The DA listened, expression tightening with every revelation. "You're saying," he asked, "that this man planned the murder, used his daughter to carry it out, and groomed her into believing she would be a hero for doing it?" "Yes," Detective Brisbane replied. "That's exactly what we're saying." The DA paused, "Then we're reopening the case." And with that, the facade David had carefully constructed for years began to crumble. Investigators interrogated Patty next. What started as quiet, trembling soon spiraled into sobs, then confessions, then chilling revelations. She admitted she and David had grown close. She admitted she loved him. She admitted they talked openly about how Linda created problems, and how the family would be happier without her. And then came the most damning statement. "David told me Cinnamon was the only one who could do it. Because she was young, because she wouldn't go to prison. He said it was the only way." Patty broke, fully, completely. She confessed she helped plan the murder. She admitted she helped stage the pills. She admitted she listened to David confidently describe a future where Linda was gone, and they could all live quietly in a big house. Detectives could hardly believe the extent of manipulation. David had weaponized two teenage girls, one his daughter, one his sister-in-law, and shaped them into tools for a murder he didn't dare commit himself. True masterminds don't lift the gun, they lift the strings. David was arrested in a dramatic confrontation. Officers reported that he didn't yell, didn't panic, didn't protest. He simply adjusted his glasses and whispered, "This is ridiculous," as if the world was inconveniencing him. In court, the prosecution built a case brick by brick. Cinnamon's coerced confession, the life insurance policies, the emotional conditioning, Patty's testimony, David's calm, inhuman behavior, the financial trail of luxury after Linda's death. The defense attempted to paint Patty as an unstable liar, Cinnamon as confused, and the investigators as biased, but nothing could counter the sheer weight of evidence. The jury deliberated for only a short time. They returned with one word: guilty. Patty was sentenced to a youth facility due to her age at the time of the murder. David Brown, the orchestrator, was sentenced to life in prison. He would die behind bars years later, never expressing remorse, never acknowledging guilt, never apologizing to the daughter whose life he destroyed. David Brown believed he had engineered the perfect crime. But manipulation, greed, and hidden motives have a way of surfacing, and when they did, his empire of lies collapsed. When the truth finally came out, the world saw Cinnamon Brown through a different lens. She was no longer the teenage monster newspapers had portrayed in the 1980s. She was revealed as both a victim and a survivor. A 14-year-old girl manipulated beyond comprehension, a child who believed her father's love required sacrifice. A daughter who thought she was saving her family. A young mind conditioned to obey without question. Cinnamon's eventual release came after years of emotional healing therapy and the slow, painful acknowledgement that the man she loved most had never loved her in return, not in a way a father should. He loved control. He loved power. He loved the way they trusted him enough to ruin their lives for him. In interviews later, Cinnamon spoke softly, carefully, with the weight of experience in her eyes. "I thought I was helping him," she said. "I thought Linda was the problem. I thought if I did what he wanted, everything would be okay." She paused, "But I never asked myself why a father would want his child to do something like that." Her voice cracked. "And now I know it's because he didn't care what happened to me." Love, when twisted, becomes a weapon. Trust, when exploited, becomes a trap. And innocence, once stolen, is never fully restored. Cinnamon rebuilt her life slowly. She reunited with family members who still loved her. She pursued education. She advocated for emotional awareness in young people. And she spoke openly about manipulation, hoping her story would prevent others from falling into the kind of psychological web that trapped her. Her story became a case study in grooming, manipulative parenting, coerced confessions, juvenile vulnerability, the psychology of obedience for law enforcement. It was a reminder that not every confession is born from guilt. Some are born from conditioning. For psychiatrists, it was a lesson in how far emotional dominance can reach. For families, It showed how love misplaced, blind, or misused can become the most destructive force in the home. And for viewers, readers, and listeners, it became one chilling, unforgettable truth. The most dangerous place isn't always a dark alley or a stranger's silhouette. Sometimes it's your own house.